Hey guys, JJ here at this time to chat a little bit about daily fantasy sports, some strategy, some NFL. And I just want ultimately the goal of this video is for you guys to be more aware and better players in daily fantasy sports than you were before you watched this video. A quick brief on me. My name or my tag in all daily fantasy sports lobbies, FanDuel, DraftKings, Yahoo, is Uncle Dunkle. You may have seen me in lobbies before. I play pretty high stakes. Been playing high stakes for a little over 5 years now. Like I said, the goal of this video is to make you guys more aware and maybe walk you through some of the strategies that I utilize specifically for NFL. Yeah, hope you guys enjoy this. Basically, before I go into all the ins and outs of strategies that I like to use and things and processes, I just want to briefly touch on the contest types because I'm going to reference them throughout the video. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So there are cash games, which you'll hear often referred to in daily fantasy sports. These will consist of heads up contests, 50-50s, double ups. 50-50s are basically you put your money in, you'll make about 90% of it back as long as you finish in the top 50% of the bracket. So for instance, you enter a contest for $10. If you finish in the top 50, you'll win $9. That extra dollar is taken by or per entry is taken by the sites for rake. Double ups will be instead of winning $9 for 10, you'll win 10 for 10, but now you have to finish in practically the top 40 or 45% of your contests, depending on the size. So you'll have some tournaments as well. You'll hear multiple people say, I like these guys as tournament plays, or I like these guys as cash game plays. This is ultimately what they're referring to. But in your tournaments, I consist of tournaments to be any kind of triple up, which is, you got to finish in the top 30% and you'll win 3 times what you bought in for. A quintuple up, which is you got to finish in the top 5. You got to finish in the top 5 or top 20% and you'll win 5 times what you paid to get in for. You'll also see satellites and qualifiers. These are like small entry tournaments where you can win big tickets or tickets into higher prize tournaments. There's no cash specifics in those. But you do win tickets for bigger tournaments if you do win or just fall into that cash line. You'll find multipliers, which are like, if you have a 50-man contest, they'll tell you like the top 5 will split the pool evenly. So maybe like out of a 50-man contest, the top 5 will all get $30 each or $40 each, whatever the contest is. You'll also see single tournament entries. These are the ones I prefer to enter, just because. And I'll go into multi-tournaments as well, but in single entries, you're only allowed to enter one actual lineup, so you're not going to find as much call it craziness. Typically, your scores aren't as high in single entries as they are in multi-entries, but again, it's just because it makes sense. Multi-entries, people can enter as many lineups, sometimes up to 150 lineups or 200 lineups into contests. So single entries are the way to go for tournaments. Multi-entries, you'll hear people say, "Oh, I like these guys as GPP plays." Basically, that stands for Guaranteed Prize Pool. And, you'll see a bunch of these tournaments, multi-entry, where, you can enter as many contests as it tells you can. Typically, the number is about 3 or 4%, meaning that you can't enter more entries than 3 or 4% of the entire tournament. That's typically where they'll cap you at. But, you could see why multi-tournament entries would have higher scores than single. The other tournaments, the other things that are there, you'll often find boosters, which are kind of like the multipliers that I discussed, and step tournaments or step contests. Basically, you enter a contest for $2. They call it step 1. If you win that or you come in second in that, they'll give you a ticket for step 2, which is a $7 contest. You come in first or second out of 10 in that, you'll get a $25 ticket for step 3. And if you come in first and second in that, you'll get a $88 ticket for step 4, which is a 6-man contest where first place gets $200. Their thinking there is you can just buy in for $2 and you can kind of slowly, land yourself at $200 if you win all that much. For me, those kind of are a waste. I just find it kind of crazy to me that those actually even fill, because you can just enter better stuff for $2 or $7, whatever entry you're going into. Okay, so basically just wrapped up the basics of the games and the action, or the type of games you can enter on DraftKings. So I'm going to go into a little bit of strategy now, dive into some ins and outs of things I look for and things that I know will help you guys. Okay, so the first thing that I'm looking for when the slate comes out or when I begin to research the slate is without a doubt is going to be the NFL lines. I think that, this is common practice for most, but I just want to make sure that everybody's kind of using or utilizing those lines initially. You kind of want to know where the most points are going to be scored, and you can use Vegas. You can use Vegas's totals and spreads to come up with projected points per contest for the two teams. And once you have the projected points, you're going to do this for every team. You're going to put in a spreadsheet or however you'd like to do it. There's multiple sites that'll do this for you, but you will put all the numbers in front of you. You can even use conditional formatting in Excel to kind of like green out the top numbers and red out the lowest scoring numbers, the lowest projected numbers. But ultimately, you want to have all those numbers in front of you for when you begin to actually look into players. But so I just want to be clear. Now, granted, spreads are your friend, but at times they can also be your enemy. You need to realize that don't get caught up 100% in the spread. Like, don't feel like, oh, I see the Saints are playing the Bucks, so I need at least 2 players from each team. These are the highest scoring games. Regardless, I need multiple players from these teams based on the slate. No. You need to realize that it still comes down to player price because value is associated to the price that you're paying for the player, and don't let the spread dictate that. I mean, let the spread dictate some of where faster paces may be projected, where more points might be projected. But don't just assume, oh, the Saints are projected 55. I'll pay whatever price Drew Brees is. I'll pay whatever price Alvin Kamara is. You need to make sure you're looking. Don't overuse the spreads, is I guess what I'm getting at. I think some people just get way caught up in the spread because they feel like, oh, the Saints are projected 5 or 6 more points than everybody else today. I need at least 2 or 3 Saints players, and like they start to forget about that price, which is the most important factor when you're building your DFS lineups. That kind of goes to the wayside. So just something to keep in mind. Make sure you're using spreads initially for your research to help you, but do not overuse it in the fact that you're now all of a sudden forgetting that value for a per price player is the most important part. Okay, the second thing for me, and kind of going off of the value like I was stating before, value is the most important part, and 3x or 3 times is your goal. Okay, if a player is priced 4K, if a player priced 4K, you practically want them to get you 12 points. If a player is priced 5K, you want them to get you 15 points. And I say this because you have a 50K allotment of money to work with, and you'll notice that in most of your cash games, 150 is generally a score that will get you in the money. Now, tournaments are typically a little different. Tournaments, you're going to want to go for 4x, shoot for a goal of over 200. But I just want to be clear, when you're looking through your players, you always want to make sure that 3x is your goal, especially if you're entering a lot of 50-50s, heads-ups, double-ups, games where there's a lot of people that are going to be in the contest and you just need to finish in the top 50% or top 40%. 150 overall should be your goal. And you basically, when you're looking at specifically cash games and value, you want players with high floors. The ceiling's not as important, but you want the players with high floors. Now, granted, high ceilings are great too, but you always want to target guys that, if they're 4K, there's probably a very low percentage that maybe they'll get you less than 10, maybe, right? Or if you have a guy that's 5K, maybe there's a very low percentage he'll get you less than 12. These are guys you would consider that have high floors, and these are guys you always want to look for in cash games. Now, in tournaments, you don't really care as much about the low floors or high floors. You are really about guys that have high ceilings. Guys that a guy like Tyreek Hill, who in any given game could catch 4 or 5 passes for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Those are the types of guys you want. But Tyreek Hill's not always a guy you would find in a cash game because his stat lines are volatile. He's a big play guy. He's reliant on big plays. He's going to be someone you're going to want to always use in tournaments and cash games. And I want to use these terms differently across this video because I play a lot of cash games. Those are the bulk of what I play consistently. It's maybe the most money. And I constantly see lineups where people have, quote unquote, tournament type of players in cash games. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that these people aren't utilizing their money in the proper way. Don't get me wrong. If you're high on a guy who for the week is a tournament play, you call it. Everybody is touting that this guy is a tournament play, he's a risky play, and you like him a lot, so you want to use him in cash. Fine. But this is not a strategy you can consistently use week after week after week after week. You need to consistently utilize guys that have high floors in cash games and guys that have high ceilings in tournament games or tournaments, the step ups, the boosters, the triple ups. Those are the guys you want in those types of contests. You want to make sure that when you're approaching a slate and thinking about value, that you're really starting from the bottom up. Okay, and I say this because like a guy like Adam Thielen, right? Starts the season seven or eight straight games, 100 yards. In the beginning of the year, his price was called moderately low, and it slowly kind of climbed, and it became almost like yak worthy, his price as he started to climb the price. And what you're realizing is as he goes above 8,000, as he goes above 9,000, now you need him to be at 27. And Adam Thielen's not exactly a guy that's going to get you 40 points, right? So he's not a guy that can really get you 4 or 5x at that price, right? So you need to always be cognizant of the pricing and how it climbs up. Almost think of it like weekly, like you're playing a new game. Silly reference, but like you're playing a new game of Chutes and Ladders, right? You're climbing. You start at the bottom. Your goal is to climb up. You're looking at all your options, and you're just slowly climbing the ladder with players. If you played Chutes and Ladders where you were starting at the top, you'd almost have nowhere to go, right? Because you'd be practically at the end. And I know it's a silly reference. I play this game with my sister, probably way too often. But I like to use it as a comparison here because I think far too often people think that it's okay to start at the top. Let me plug in my big money guys, and then I'll figure it out from there. You should be plugging in all your lower priced guys. Start at the bottom. Look through all the player pricing from the bottom up. And as you see guys that have good value or the pricing's good for that player or that team or however you're justifying it, that's when you slowly start building on. You slowly start plugging guys in from the bottom up. Okay, I can't stress that enough because ultimately you're looking for value. The toughest part of value is typically on the lower price guys, not the higher price guys. You'll find weeks where that's a little different, but for the most part, it's always going to be tough to find the lower price guys that are going to meet your quotas so that you can get in the higher price guys. Don't start that process in reverse. Okay, we talked a little bit about utilizing the spreads, talked about making sure value and price are right, because those make the most sense, or prices that make the most sense. Want to also bring up the fact that, I feel like when people approach a slate, they're always like, oh, well, I need to get myself the lineup that's going to score me the most points. And while logically that makes sense, your goal is actually to create a lineup that's going to score more points than everyone else. And while those might seem like the same thing, if you're somebody who plays in cash games, you just need to finish better than 50% of the field. So what does this mean? This means that my goal going into a slate, specifically for cash games, is I'm looking for the lineup that's got the best opportunity to score more points than all my opponents. I'm not looking for the lineup for me that's going to score the most points. I'll explain a little further. If 3 or 4 guys are going to be 30, 40% owned for XYZ reasons, you've done your research, whatever. Maybe those 3 or 4 guys add up to, call it 25% of your salary, right? But you now know that those 3 or 4 guys are going to be 25 to 30% owned. Well, if you researched a little further, maybe you could say, okay, maybe if I took half of that salary, which I'd say 2 players, and I swapped them out with these 2 players, because I think these 2 players have a better shot of outscoring them, and they'll be a fraction of the percentage that those other guys are owned. That's where you're going to find small advantages. And some of the top guys, all the top guys are really doing this. You'll wonder why were these guys touted so much, and then I go into the slate and then I don't see any of the big guys with them in their lineups. Well, because that maybe early in the week they were touted as good plays, and then things happened or injury news came out, and other players happened to move up their charts, and then they didn't end up playing XYZ player. But you always want to be, your goal should always be to try to score more than your opponents. Remember, the payouts of daily fantasy sports is pari-mutuel. Okay, they're guaranteed before you have a certain set amount of opponents, and your goal is to really score more than the bulk of them. Okay, so when a guy is going to be 50% owned, you need to question yourself: is the player worth the ownership that he's going to be? Because that's a huge component of daily fantasy sports. Understanding value. Like, for instance, I don't use tout websites to tell me who I need to play. I use tout websites to tell me who my opponents are going to play. Because, for the most part, I can have an idea. Okay, this player is going to be somewhat owned. This player is going to be somewhat owned. But for the most part, a lot of people who are playing daily fantasy sports are looking for information. They're looking on different websites. Just type daily fantasy sports and whatever week it is in the NFL, and you'll find a ton of links in Google for people writing articles. You need to realize that these articles are written for everybody to help everybody, but you can utilize those articles to help you understand who your opponents are going to be playing. You can use those articles to tell you, okay, I went to 10 different sites this week. On all 10 sites, these 2 players were written down on all 10 sites. That's got to boost the ownership of them, right? There's going to be more people that have them, especially if you have a few novices coming and playing DFS for the first few times. They're going to be looking at these articles and thinking, I got to play these guys. So just realize when you're looking through those articles, utilize those to understand how your opponent's lineups are going to look. Because again, the goal is to score more than your opponents, not exactly score the most points. I just wanted to make sure that that's understood Because way too often I hear, oh, you think this guy's going to have a great game. No. But I think this guy's going to have a better game than this guy who's going to be about 40, 50% owned. So I believe I'm going to have an advantage there, and I'd like to utilize it. You guys should make sure you're doing the same. Another tip worth mentioning is player props from Vegas, from offshore. These are typically released or bulk released at least on Sunday morning. If you play offshore, you'll find them Sunday morning. If you play on some other sites, maybe they'll release them a little earlier for you. But Sunday morning, these need to be utilized. And I think sometimes people will research in the middle of the week. They'll listen to radio shows or podcasts or videos on who they need to be playing. And their lineups are kind of like there on Saturday. Like they kind of know who they're playing. And then Sunday comes, they maybe make small movements when right before call hours before the game starts. That Sunday morning, you need to be looking at all the player props that are offered because at the end of the day, Vegas and offshore, they're the sharpest of the sharp. Okay, I don't care who you talk to. Vegas has plenty of guys doing this research. The numbers they're putting out are the right ones, and you need to be like, if you like a guy right at a certain price, and then you realize his prop is call it 30 or 40 yards less than what you would have assumed. Assume Vegas is right. Don't assume you're right. I'm not telling you can't be right in a one-off situation or two-off situation. Make sure you're utilizing those props to your advantage. If you look at a slate and you're wondering why Julio Jones' prop is 108 or 109 for the day, you need to start asking yourself, wait a minute. Why don't I have Julio, in my player rankings? Why didn't I even pick him? His price is fair. Why didn't I pick him if his prop is this much? Make sure you're using those Vegas odds and props to build the best lineups. I'm not telling you to do all your research up to Sunday and then just burn the lineup and then recreate a new one based on what Vegas is telling you. No, but make sure you're using it to your advantage, even if it helps you with one or two players. With these one or two players that you put in could make the difference on whether you cash or not. I mean, every week there's one or two players that make a difference whether you cash or not. And it's those decisions long term that will make you more profitable. Before I end this video, I gave you guys those 5 strategy tips that I typically utilize or always utilize when I'm building my lineups. But I want to just give you briefly some strategic tips in regards to building lineups specifically for NFL and typically things I utilize for. So granted, every slate's different. I'm not here to preach to you the fact that what I'm about to tell you is going to be Bible for every slate. But for the most part, or even I'd say more than 60 to 70% of the time, these are, call it the direction that you go in when you're building. Okay, your quarterback should be somebody you're paying up for on DraftKings. Okay, almost weekly. I get it. Sometimes you might look at a guy and go, okay, wow, I can get Ryan Tannehill for 4,800, or I can get Eli Manning for 4,900 in a great matchup. Where they're projected a lot of points. Makes a lot of sense. His projections are great. What we need to realize is that you need players who are going to score you points. Okay, good quarterbacks will weekly get you a solid number of points. Okay, a guy like Drew Brees, for the most part, will get you good points. Cam Newton, Tom Brady, these are guys that will consistently get you points. And when they're priced in a fair range, as long as DraftKings is going to keep these quarterbacks priced in the 7K and under range, you need to realize that just take your 3X and move on. You know what I mean? Don't try to get cute with it. Like for instance, Pat Mahomes is weekly good for 21 plus. And the fact that you get those bonuses over 300 yards, guys that consistently throw for 300 yards, that's 15 points right there. Guy throws for 300 yards, it's 15 points. And that doesn't even include if he scores touchdowns or if if he's like Mahomes and he rushes a bit, or if he's like Cam and he rushes a bit. Get your good quarterbacks in your lineups, and then move on from there. Now, I know I'm going a little all over the place because I'm about to reference defense. Defenses you should absolutely never be paying more for. Never really be paying more than $2,500 for, ever. Okay? If the goal is 3X, right? You need a defense to get you 3X. Weekly, you will find a defense under $2,500, maybe even under $2,400 weekly, that will get you value at that price. Again, for the defense is $2,400, they need 7 points. 7 points, that's it. That's a few sacks. That's given up, up to 20 points, 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals. And we'll get you over that 7-point hump with call it an interception or fumble recovery, a few sacks. I don't understand when these people like they look at like the Ravens at home against Buffalo, and the Ravens are 2 touchdown favorites, and the Ravens defense is 3,900, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna lock in the Ravens defense. The defense should be the last part of your lineup you're putting in. You should have all the guys you want. And then you look at your defense, you might have 2,200, and you're like, oh shit, there's no good defenses left. It doesn't matter. It's just pick a defense. Just stick one in. I can't tell you how often I've seen people have have these what would have been great lineups, but they dropped off a player from 1,000 just so they could put a defense, and that's 1,000 more, and they end up getting screwed. Not to say it can't help you at some point or another, but Just please. You're picking defenses. Always target yourself under 24, 2,500. You'll find the most value there. Because again, as you climb up, like think about it. Like if you played the Ravens at 3.9, they would practically need 12 points for you. Not to say they can't do it, but for a defense to get 12 points, they either need to practically shut the team out, or get a luck box touchdown or a luck box fumble recovery, pick six, kick return. Those are not things you can count on. So make sure, and like I said, weekly you will find a defense that's either a 2 or 3 point underdog, or even a 2 point favorite, or it's just a low total where 7 points makes a lot of sense that they will get you at 24, 2,500. Like I said, when I'm going into a slate, I'm always approaching from the bottom up. So I'm always looking for the quickest value I can find, and then I'm moving from there. So with regards to receivers, DraftKings is giving you a full point per catch, and you're getting a bonus at 100 yards. You need to be finding guys that are slowly climbing, down the ladder or down the chute, if you will, in price, and then target those guys. Okay, I mean, you'll notice a guy will have 2 or 3 bad weeks, and his price will drop. The prices are different every week, and that's what makes the slates different. Now, injuries cause issues as well because or add additional complexity because now you have to maybe you're plugging in players that you didn't initially intend on. The NFL, there are injuries every week, and these are things you need to be aware of, and you need to make sure you're plugging in players that are filling in starting positions, whether it's a wide receiver, whether it's a running back. Running backs are more often than not better plays when they're starting versus wide receivers that are newly starting just because of the volume. But for me, for wide receivers, I'm always looking for guys that are climbing down the ladder in price, and a guy that I know will not get me any less than 2x. Okay, guys that are just consistently catching passes. They might not be scoring touchdowns. I think sometimes people become a little what's the word I'm thinking of? Confused because they're looking at a player and they're like, oh wow, this guy's been averaging 20 points a game for the last 3 weeks. Meanwhile, he scored a touchdown every week. Touchdowns are not something you can count on weekly from wide receivers. You need to be looking at catches and targets. Targets is the biggest one because if a guy's getting consistent targets, at some point that's going to come to fruition for you. And if the targets, and the thing is, DraftKings algorithm isn't going to navigate for targets. It's going to navigate for catches and actual points because targets don't get you any points. But what targets do is the targets can project the future, right? Because if a guy's getting 12, 13 targets for 3 straight weeks, but he's only catching 4 or 5 balls, yeah, there might be something wrong. Maybe the communication's off between him and the quarterback, but the volume is there. At some point, that volume is going to turn into production. And so for me, I'm always looking for guys that are climbing down the ladder for wide receivers, catching multiple balls. Guys like a guy like a Keenan Allen or Adam Thielen when he was priced much cheaper. Guys that are going to catch 5, 6 balls. Julian Edelman, as long as he's priced under 6K, he's typically a good play. Just because these are guys that are always you always know they can catch that 6 for 60. If they score, it's a cherry on top, but they can always score more if game flow plays out that way. Game flow is another piece of the puzzle that not a lot of people always look at. If a team's projected to win by 10 points or 14 points, typically you'd want to more or less target running backs on the team that's favored, wide receivers on the team that's an underdog in that scenario, because the game flow is going to indicate that the team that's a big underdog is going to be throwing, and the team that's a favorite is going to be running. So you want to make sure you're picking positions there accordingly and using it in your models to make sure you're building yourself, the most efficient lineups. As for running backs, you will find in the NFL that there are running backs that are a lot more consistent. The top running backs are a lot more consistent than the top receivers. So as you're building your lineups, you almost want to not exactly leave running back blank, but that's where you want to leave your space for the home run hitters in your lineup, the big price guys. A guy like Gurley, a guy like Kamara, a guy like now the big year McCaffrey's having, right? These are guys, that you Barkley. These are guys that you want to consistently try to afford. Don't overdo it, but try to afford if you can, because that their floors are high, their ceilings are high. So ultimately, to reiterate the whole lineup building process there, pay up for quarterback when you can, because it's arguably the safest points in your lineup. The top quarterbacks in the league rarely have duds, especially if they're home. Or especially if they're in a game that's supposed to be a shootout, they rarely have duds. Don't get me wrong, it happens, but you're going to find more often than not the guys like Eli Manning, the guys like Blake Bortles, the guys that you're like, oh, they're in a good spot here at a cheap price. These are the guys more often than not that will burn you in those positions where you could have had consistent points with a top production. Defenses never pay more than $2,500 or less for defenses. I mean, granted, look, if the slate works out and it makes the most sense, fine, I guess you can pay more, but nearly every slate you're in NFL daily fantasy sports never pay more than $2,500 for a defense. Wide receivers, again, you're always looking for guys that are climbing down the ladder, guys with a lot of targets, not so much receptions, because the more targets they have without the receptions means that DraftKings algorithm isn't pricing them right. It means that they're slowly kind of dipping down in price. Those are the guys you kind of want to make sure you're targeting. Don't be looking for touchdowns and wide receivers, because touchdowns are not something you can consistently rely on. Okay. And then again, once you have your lineup like that, didn't really touch much on tight ends. Tight ends is a position I will typically punt. Punt just means you're typically going to play a low-priced guy in that role. But as long as they're going to keep guys like a Travis Kelce or like a Gronk or like a Zach Ertz priced relatively cheap, or call it under 7K, that you can always have them as viable options. But you want to make sure that there are weekly options where you can punt at tight end for under 3,300. That'll get you. Because keep in mind, guys, if you're paying 3K for a tight end, right? What does he need, right? He needs like what, four catches for 50 yards, 5 catches for 40 yards. That's 9. That's 3x, and you're done. And if he just so happens to magically score, which a lot of big tight ends are big red zone targets. If he just happens to score, say he catches a 10-yard pass for a touchdown, it's 8 points. 8 points. Now he needs one catch, and he's already a value for you. So, tight ends is typically a position I punt. But again, I can't tell you that there's not one-off situations. And again, if the pricing's still going to keep the top tight ends under 7K, you could always still use those to your advantage. And again, like I said, wide receivers always climbing down the ladder. Guys, multiple catches, multiple targets, running backs. And then by the time I get to running backs, and I've already incorporated injuries into my game plan already, the idea is that if I have enough money, I'm definitely going to be spending up big on a running back, because those are the out of all the flex positions, those are the safest positions. They're the highest floor guys. The guys like Gurley, Barkley, McCaffrey. These are the guys that weekly will produce for you, and you won't feel let down. I want to take a moment to thank you guys for watching the video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel. And look, don't be shy. Shoot some comments below. Ask some questions. If you have any questions, I know it's week 15 NFL. So if you have any questions about who to play tomorrow in daily fantasy sports, if you have some questions of your own based on a few different players, which one should I start, which one shouldn't I, which one should go in my lineups for tournaments, which should go in for cash games, whatever, guys, whatever you want to comment on below, just shoot us a comment or a question, and we'll be happy to answer. Again, guys, good luck tomorrow or good luck for all your games on Sunday, and again, thanks again for watching.